living with wolves is going to take compassion. I don't think we're enemies on a lot of this. That we're all Californians. We all live in the state. We want to see people succeed. I think it's just we need to keep working on a level of respect between our urban and rural citizens, and bring them together to talk about these issues more and understand where they're each coming from. I think wolves are part of the landscape now. And the state has made a commitment to follow their recovery. They are a state-listed species. So I think it's the reality, and it's the reality not just because of the stance the state has made, but just when you look at the surrounding population, the rest of the Western U.S. It's going to take time. It's going to take time. There are going to probably be some mistakes, and we're going to have to just figure it out together. My name is Nate Libal, and I'm currently employed by California Department of Fish and Wildlife as a wolf specialist, working out of the Chico office, so I cover both Region 1 and Region 2 for CDFW. Originally, I'm from Pennsylvania, a really small town called Little Meadows up in northeast Pennsylvania. I grew up on a hobby farm, and that kind of influenced me quite a bit. As far as wanting to work, in the outdoors, work with animals, work in ecosystems, I think it all kind of started with my upbringing on that small property there. I ended up going to the west coast of Canada, the University of British Columbia, and started out there as just a general biology major as well. But within the first semester, found the natural resource conservation program, found a really good core group of people that were passionate about doing that kind of work too, and kind of from there, just built off of that. Finished my biology degree at the University of British Columbia and worked for several seasons as a seasonal technician on different wildlife projects, a pretty normal thing for most wildlife majors to do, and got really into large mammal management. So ended up doing a master's degree at Mississippi State University, which is actually on grizzly bears, not wolves. But just over time, got more and more into large mammal management, and then kind of narrowing down into carnivore management, which eventually led to wolf work. I spent a little over 4 years in Wisconsin, then moved to Northeast Oregon, where I worked for the wolf program for the state there for about 6.5 years. And then a little over a year ago, coming to California. Maybe working in these different states has given me an interesting perspective to bring to California too, because wolf recovery in some of these other areas I've worked looks a lot different. Wisconsin has had wolves, really since the 70s, is when they started recolonizing there. So, 50 plus years later, the wolf population is quite robust there. It covers quite a large portion of northern Wisconsin. And, just given the fact that they've had wolves for so long, it's not as new and as raw for people living there. Whereas, I kind of then went on a journey out west to Oregon that has had wolves for longer than California has, but not nearly as long as Wisconsin. And then to California, where the wolf population is quite new and still, expanding to a lot of new areas. And so I think with that, there's a learning curve, that everyone's going through with kind of figuring out how we manage this new reality. But also it's raw and it's new for folks, and I think that's oftentimes very scary. That people in California, as new wolf groups are showing up in these new areas, they're not sure how to respond to it necessarily. And an interesting kind of story I say to kind of point to how I think the human perspective changes with time with different species is that in Wisconsin, certainly there are folks that are affected by them that are not happy that wolves are there. But I don't think it brings, like when a new wolf group pops up, it doesn't necessarily bring the same amount of fear from the community, because they have had these species in the state for a long time now. It's a new thing. But while I was there, at least, when there would be a sighting of a cougar within the state, it was huge news, and people were really freaked out about that. And I think it's because they still don't have, as far as we know, really a breeding population in the state. So that was a very new thing for folks in Wisconsin. And I find out west is kind of the opposite. California's journey to a recovering wolf population, it's still fairly early on. And so right now, the species is both federally and state listed as endangered. So there are federal protections involved with that, and then there's a state level of protections. As far as looking just at the state management of the species, our wolf management plan identifies 3 phases of wolf recovery. Phase 1 being very early, phase 2 kind of a middle ground of recovery, and then phase 3 is more of a management stage. So at the end of 2024, we were still in phase 1 of management, which means there were less than 4 breeding pairs in the state for 2 consecutive years. And a breeding pair would be breeding male and female adult, and then at least 2 pups that survived to the end of that calendar year. And most of that activity is still restricted to Northeast California. Presumably there are still quite a few areas that we'll expect in the future to have wolves, and do not currently have them now. On the monitoring and biology side, the big part of my job is to figure out how many wolves we have here and what that population looks like. Say where the wolves are, how many there are, what's the composition of the population, and genetically speaking, how are they doing. So the way that typically works for an area that hasn't had wolves before will be, we rely a lot on public reports. The people that live in these communities are almost always going to know about the wolves before CDFW does. We do have cameras out on the landscape to keep an eye in areas, but really those public reports are vital. And so if we start getting, credible public reports in an area that there are wolves there, the next step is for me or another biologist to go out there and really spend a lot of time to figure out exactly what's going on. I'll, look at a map of where these reports are coming in. I'll be thinking about, seasonally, where would it make sense for the wolves to be based on the prey base that's there? Where are the normal travel corridors that would make sense for the species to be moving around? And then I'll spend a lot of time running all of those roads looking for signs, so looking for tracks and scat. So I am out here surveying some forestry roads, and I've come across a set of wolf tracks out here. All right, as we come along the side of the truck here, you're going to see very faint in the dirt here some tracks. Continue along here, and there's a couple of ways we know these are wolf tracks. They've got kind of classic canine form of an interdigital pad with 2 lobes in the back, 4 toes showing. There are claws. This is the front foot, which is larger. We've got a hind foot there, and wolves often travel in this 2x2 pattern when they're trotting along, with the hind foot slightly the front foot slightly before the hind foot. And then we're looking at, size as well, kind of compare it to some other canines that could be out here. So we got a front track. I'm gonna put our ruler next to there. And we got about 4 inches, not including the claws. That's a pretty standard length. Compared to a domestic dog track, the toes are much tighter, whereas on a domestic dog, they often spread a bit. Here we've got a wolf scat. We've got one section here, and then a couple more pieces up there. And the way we can tell this is a wolf scat, for one thing, there are tracks here, which is awfully helpful. But in general, wolf scats have this kind of tubular, ropey appearance, not real smooth. It's got a little bit of a ropey texture. A lot of times with hair content, it'll also have kind of a tapered end to it. It's not as noticeable in that chunk, but you can see it a little bit better here. Size-wise, it varies quite a bit, and this one's kind of in between. This section here is the largest and is a little bit more than 1 inch, and that's often what we're looking at. Once we have the scat, we can send that in for genetic analysis, and that'll let us know exactly who that wolf is, male or female, what color it is, where it came from potentially based on genetic markers. We can tell if it came from one of our known packs in the state, if it came from Oregon, another place, and then try to figure out, how many are there. Is this just a single instance of a single wolf here? Do we actually have a male and female? Can we confirm reproduction and resident activity? The kind of next step is to try to get a radio collar on those wolves. And the reason that's so important, there's a couple of reasons. One is that with that data, we get a very clear image of exactly where that pack ranges, and not just the total range of that pack, but seasonally where are they spending most of their time, where are they getting their resources from. And it also allows us to do a much better job at managing conflict. So it allows us to identify specific instances of depredation. find livestock that have been killed on the landscape. It allows us to update our publicly available map, which shows generally where collared wolves are in the state at any given time. And that's important information for producers to know, so they have an idea of what the potential risk is for them. And then it also allows us to get a very good idea of numbers. So from that collar data, we can identify den sites when wolves reproduce. And what we'll do is we'll go into those den sites after the wolves move off and collect all of the scat that we can find there. And that way we get genetic markers for everyone in the pack, all of the adults as well as all the pups produced in a given year. And that gives us a baseline to then look later in the year to see how many wolves we have left. What was the recruitment for that year, how many pups survived. And also because we then have a genetic marker on everyone in that pack, no matter where those animals go, if they go and start a new pack somewhere else, we already have that marker. So if we get genetic material from a new area, we can match it back to a wolf from their natal pack.
So what I'm doing here is walking in on a wolf pup rendezvous site. It's basically a nursery site throughout the late spring and summer for the wolves. And it's usually an area adjacent to a meadow, which we've got over in this direction. And then some heavy cover where the pups actually spend their time during the day, resting when it's hot and waiting for the adults to bring back food to provision them. So as we walk in here, we're going to be looking to see if there's sign of them. And what I'm typically going to find is a bunch of bed sites. This is a little bed site that was dug out, and there's a scat there as well. And I'm thinking in this heavy cover here, there's probably a bunch more beds, so we'll do a quick walk around here.
I definitely think wolves are part of the landscape now. And I think what it looks like in different parts of the state is going to vary as well. You know, California is not homogenous. It's very dynamic and different from place to place, you know, both the human population and the ecosystems. I mean, sooner or later, I think there are going to be wolves in Northwest California. Just looking at the prey densities and the habitat types there's really no reason there wouldn't be wolves there. And then even areas that we wouldn't necessarily expect there to be resident wolves, I think eventually, you know, if the population is large enough, wolves can disperse so quickly and so far. We'll likely see at times, you know, wolves in parts of Southern California and in areas, desert areas, different ecosystems that we're not really used to seeing wolves in. And so I think things like that are going to become more the norm rather than the exception. Like anywhere, there is conflict. There's conflict both for livestock, which is, you know, common throughout wolf range. But in general, the areas I'm working out of for conflict situations at least are kind of small agricultural communities throughout Northern California, places in, you know, Siskiyou, Lassen, Plumas County, Sierra County. Fairly small populations of people, large proportion of that population involved in agriculture in some form or another, and kind of that matrix of public and private land. So typically, you know, moderately to large sized ranches, privately owned, and then large stretches of public national forest or BLM land that's utilized at least seasonally for livestock production. A big part of our work right now is trying to lower the amount of conflict that we see. And so what that looks like, it's a combination of, you know, data sharing, utilizing the collar data we have to not only find carcasses out in the landscape when a depredation has happened, but to hopefully preemptively let folks know about potential risks so that they can be more active in defending their animals and lowering the level of conflict. You know, some of the tools that have been employed by different folks in Siskiyou County and other places include drone activity. USDA Wildlife Services has a drone program to haze away wolves from livestock. That's been utilized at times. The department has a fairly large stockpile of different tools that's available to loan to producers, and that includes fencing materials that can be used to keep wolves out of areas with cattle. It includes alarm boxes that are used to both scare the wolves and notify a producer if a collared wolf is coming close to their livestock. Tools that are going to be useful on one property may not work on another one. And wolves are a smart animal. They're able to learn over time, you know, about risk and reward. and tools that may be effective in one season, if overused or if there's enough exposure to a tool, the wolves can learn over time that that is not actually a dangerous thing to them. So yeah, it's a struggle for sure, not just in Siskiyou County, but everywhere else. So the whaleback pack is one of the better known ones in the state, both because it has been here for quite some time, but also it is one of the packs with the largest amount of conflict associated with it. So that pack area does overlap a lot of producers, both on their private ground, particularly in the winter, and then on public allotments that are used for cattle grazing during the summer. So over the years, there have been quite a number of depredations there. The really great thing about Siskiyou County, there's a couple. One is that they have county employees that assist us with wolf management. So there are county trappers and a wolf liaison that assist the department in monitoring that population and mitigating conflict. So most of the follow-up to potential depredations is done by county staff, and that is a huge help to the department. I can't overstate that. As well, those folks that live in that community and work in those roles, there's definitely a trust factor there, that those folks are involved in the livestock community and the community at large already. And so I think their voice carries a lot of weight in those communities, and they're a great bridge between the department and those local folks. There is at times, a level of distrust between the department and folks on the ground. But also, I'm not a livestock producer. I'm learning all the time from them. But I think the tools that are being developed and the messaging around those tools is way more valuable if it comes from a producer, someone that actually is living the same situation that producers in California are living. Understand livestock production, understand what tools can work and what can't work in different situations, and have actually implemented it themselves, and can speak better to what has worked and what hasn't worked. So I'm really hopeful that maybe we can facilitate more of that communication. I've had some, I hope, success in breaking down some of that, and building a level of trust, at least with me as a biologist on the ground, that even if some folks have some distrust of CDFW as a whole, as an entity, they can work with me as an individual. And I think that's a big part of these conversations, is that, I'm a person. I work for the department and I represent the department, but if folks meet me as Nate, they can maybe work with me a little bit easier. And I think it goes both ways, that, once I actually get on the ground with the producers, see their operation, learn about their family, learn about their background, it's easier to have future conversations because we're starting to see each other as people, as individuals. And I think it breaks down the distrust a little bit. I think we're making headway. A big part of it is just, sharing factual information too. There are some stories that continue to be circulated that, they're just not accurate. Things like the CDFW brought the wolves back, which is not true, that we're kind of covertly moving wolves around the state to different areas, and that's also has not occurred. There's a lot of angst around what wolves we have here. It's a big one we hear, that this is like a non-native species, which again, I don't believe is true. I think that a wolf is a wolf, really, that you can kind of, I don't know, you can talk about subspecies, and is this the exact same wolf that was in California 200 years ago? And at the end of the day, it's not the same wolf, because all those wolves were gone. They were extirpated. So, by virtue of that, they're not the same wolves. But that's the same story for any species that was largely extirpated. You could say the same thing for elk in a lot of places, that, we had pretty much wiped out elk in a lot of areas, and we had to reintroduce elk from places that still had elk. But there's still an elk. And I think a lot of that argument really comes down to whether or not, there are some people that just really don't want wolves here. It's not so much about the wolf that is here, it's just they don't want wolves here. There are producers that are more accepting of having wolves here, and I think that's, not necessarily something that someone's going to announce to the rest of their community. I think that's part of it too, right, is that a lot of these communities, they're very close-knit. They're families that have been there for generations. They want to support their neighbors. But at the same time, producers that have come up with strategies and tools that are working for them, that are reducing conflict, again, they might not be super thrilled wolves are here. I mean, they're still a challenge for them, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's something they've come to accept that, wolves are going to be here in the future and we have to work around that. There are even some producers that have told me, and again, they'll say, don't tell all my neighbors I said this, but I got to admit, wolves are kind of cool. Like once they actually see a wolf running across a field or hear them howl, I don't know what it is necessarily, but it is a species that just invokes a lot of emotion and passion from people for whatever reason. And I don't think necessarily, some of the ranching community is immune to that either. That they can find them to be a really interesting species. They want their livelihood to continue. They do, and that's very reasonable. That they want to have a successful operation and not have this be something that could potentially put them under. There definitely is an urban-rural divide, not just in California, but in a lot of states. And there can be this feeling, I think, from the rural side that folks in the city, because there's more people there, they're able to kind of dictate policy. But on policy that affects wildlife and open spaces, they're not necessarily as affected by that because they're not living in those areas. And so there can be some anger there that, and specific to wolves, that they'll say that, the people living in the city, they love wolves, they want wolves here, but they don't have to deal with them. They don't have to suffer any of the negative consequences, and so that's not fair for them to dictate policy. And then you'll hear, I think, sometimes from people that do live in cities, and folks that are kind of more on the pro-wolf side of things, they'll say that folks living in these rural areas, they're utilizing, public lands, and so they need to be more accepting of the species that live on those public lands, that they're not doing enough necessarily to mitigate conflicts, and so it's more their fault than the wolves' fault. And I think both of those messages, are false in a lot of ways. It's similar to where I want to see, livestock producers talk to each other more. I'd like to see folks from urban areas and rural areas talk to each other more too. And I don't think we're enemies on a lot of this. That we're all Californians. We all live in the state. We want to see people succeed, and I think that's kind of the base we need to start with. Is that we should all hope that our fellow citizens succeed in life. All of us are just, we're trying to live good lives, right? We want to have nice careers that we enjoy. We want to feel safe. We want our families to be secure and happy, and that unites all of us to get to a place where folks that love wolves and want to see very limited management of wolves can come to the table with folks that currently really do not like the idea of having any wolves in the state, can actually come to a table and come to some sort of agreement. To get to that compromise, I think the first step is compassion, is that having those groups start to talk to each other as individuals and start to really just try to see each other's perspective rather than digging in with their own perspectives.